Assalamu alaikum and good morning to everyone. I'm honored to welcome you to this side event hosted by the government of Maldives during the sidelines of 29 Climate Change Conference. This side event will provide an overview of the Maldives' journey in developing Biennial Transparency Report by 31st December 2024 deadline. Key lessons learned, challenges faced, and strategies for strengthening climate reporting and accountability under the Paris Agreement will be highlighted during this event. As an extremely vulnerable nation on the front lines of climate change, Maldives intends to utilize the BTR as a vital tool for tracking and reporting national progress in implementing its NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, as well as incorporating these institutional arrangements for integrated national planning and development. The event will delve into the coordination process across various sectors, the methodologies applied, and the lessons learned during the development of the BTR. The first presentation will be given by Ms. Fatma Raufa Musa, BTR Project Technical Coordinator, on the BTR process challenges and opportunities in NDC tracking and greenhouse gas inventory. Ms. Raufa.
So, good morning, everyone. Today I will be presenting on the BTR process, the GHG inventory and NDC tracking of the Maldives. So first, let's talk a little bit about the institutional arrangements. Okay. This is okay. I'll stay here. So the mandate of developing the BTR is with the Ministry of Climate Change, Environment and Technology, and the stakeholders are key participants in the process. The process is backed by, we have several key legislations. There's the Climate Emergency Act. There's a statistical act through which we are able to collect the information. There's a Tourism Act as one of our key sectors who contribute to the process. There's also the Utility Regulatory Act, the Waste Act, and Energy Act. The institutional arrangements nationally have been improved a lot over time since our previous biennial reportings, as well as the national communications reportings. And for this BTR, this is the institutional arrangements we used. On top, you can see the Ministry of Climate Change, Environment and Energy. The Climate Change Department of the Ministry has the overarching role of preparing the BTR. We have adaptation and mitigation 2 working groups with cross-cutting stakeholders also involved, who are normally consulted with during the development of the reporting process. For this BTR1 development, we had a BTR PMU set up, and through which the coordination happened with the department and the different agencies. As you can see, there are government agencies, NGOs, CBOs, private sector, academia, and data providers in several sectors. From here, I will move more specifically towards the GHG inventory and the NDC tracking area. For data requirements, we collected data from activity data from different tiers, as well as for the reference method, and we conducted quality assurance and data quality checks. The uncertainty analysis and The data is aimed to be very representative of Maldives, and we tried to follow the method for this BTR because we did this in a very short period of time. We tried to replicate the methodology that have been adopted for the last development of the GHG inventory as well as the NDC tracking. Here you can see an overview of what the GHG inventory of the results of the GHG inventory of Maldives. In the first pie chart, you can see overall we report our major key categories are in energy and waste sector. You can see that our total CO2 equivalent emissions are 2,359.71 kilotons, and that 96% of this is coming from our energy sector, and 3.7% is coming from the waste sector. If we're looking at emissions by the IPCC subcategories, we have the main is the energy industries, which is at 32.6%, and we have almost equivalent amount in other sectors. This other is mainly representing the electricity generation in residential domestic use. So we have an equal amount of large emissions coming from there. This is mainly the electricity generation sector. And then followed by we have transport sector, which is about 28%, and waste, which is 3.7%. Talking a little bit about NDC tracking, we followed the method we chose for the biennial update report of our previous reporting. Mainly, we follow this by we track this through programs and projects because we conduct these activities through support that is received into the country, so we keep a track through projects and programs. The NDC comprise of very specific mitigation actions that have been identified, which is mainly increasing the renewable share of the energy mix. There are also waste to energy projects and vehicle standards establishment, as well as fuel switching activities. This graph is showing an overview of how our emissions are over time. We're starting from 2010 and we're showing projections till the 2030. The red line is like the BAU scenario, that is without mitigation actions. We have around a little bit less than 4,500 gigograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. And then with the mitigation actions that I mentioned earlier, we're estimating to reduce that by about it's about 17% reduction we're estimating with the current ongoing activities. And then the dot you can see there about at 2030, that is the target we are trying to reach with the NDC commitment. So we have a way to go. So with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Raufa. Next presentation will be given by Mr. Musa Zamir Hassan, the adaptation expert on vulnerabilities, priorities, challenges, and opportunities in adaptation. Mr. Musa Zamir.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to this program that we are running here. And first and foremost, I would like to thank the government of Maldives and the climate department on achieving the BTR submission. So I think this is a very compelling evidence of our commitment to the climate change work that we undertake from the government as well as the private sector and the stakeholders in the Maldives. So I thank you all for joining us today to, in fact, celebrate and also to get to know how we have come about to this stage today and where we stand now. So on the adaptation work that we have undertaken, I would like to just highlight a little bit of what we have achieved and how we have run through the process. So let me just let you know about the key sectors that we have studied for the adaptation work. I would like to also inform you that the work that we have done is very fast-track work, and we have undertaken the work in this way because we are actually able to do that because we have a number of reports, we have a number of assessments done that support our work in putting up the adaptation experiences and the work that we have undertaken, so we are able to put forward the report. These key 8 sectors include the agriculture in terms of the food security, which is very important for the Maldives, the coral reefs and its biodiversity, which is dependent entirely, the country is dependent on these natural resources. And of course, for us, it is very important to learn about the infrastructure resilience and to ensure that our infrastructure is able to cope with the changes that are occurring and to adapt to the sea level rise and the warming of temperatures. Furthermore, water is also very essential, so we have this sector which we covered in the report. Furthermore, the public health, which is of significance because it impacts the people of the Maldives. So this is again another sector. And then we covered on the early warning and systematic observations, which supports all the activities that we are undertaking in the country. So it is also another very important sector that we covered in the adaptation part. And definitely tourism and fisheries, which is the backbone of our country in terms of supporting the economy. For that purposes, these 8 sectors are the critical areas that we covered in the BTR. So I think I don't need to go further because Mr. Rafa just now here mentioned about the gathering of information, but then definitely we also collected information and reviewed scientific data, scientific literature, and also synthesize the existing reports. And another very important aspect is the engagement with the local communities and the stakeholders. So we have engaged with the stakeholders to provide them the information that is there, and then to get to learn, and also to gather from them the kind of information that we require and the data that we need to compile the report. And of course, as a result, we are able to identify the adaptation policy strategies and also the plans that we have, and learn the challenges from these community stakeholders as well. I will just a little bit briefly mention about the very high risk that the Maldives is in, and the vulnerability that we are facing. First and foremost, globally, Maldives is recognized as one of the very vulnerable countries, as we all know, to the impacts of climate change, global warming, sea level rise, and extreme events have been impacting the Maldives. These impacts include erosion, flooding, sea surges, and groundwater salinization. So these are very critical things which support the island life, livelihood, and the economy. So this impacts greatly to our livelihoods. And also, the economic impacts are also affected because of the sea surface temperature rise and the impacts on the corals and the coral reef systems that we have. Furthermore, the extreme weather and transboundary air pollution is also a concern and a challenge for us, because it disrupts the health of the people. And some of the impacts include, the risk of some of the non-communicable disease increase, such as malaria. The risk of malaria re-emerging is also there. We also have dengue, which is increasing from our data sources that we received. This picture I just want to show to you. This is our gateway to the Maldives, the international airport, the main gateway. The island is so low. The island and the huge infrastructure that we have, this infrastructure is critical for the Maldives in terms of our economy, which drives the tourism, and also our connections basically with the international world as well. So this is a huge investment, and we need to protect this international infrastructure, this critical infrastructure. And as adaptation work, we require to undertake coastal protection and infrastructure resilience of these. Furthermore, I will just tabulate. The table here shows the focus areas that we discussed earlier, and also some of the key actions in terms of the food security, the infrastructure resilience, public health, and water security, tourism, fisheries, the economic adaptation work that we have undertaken, and also the early warning and systematic observation key actions that we have undertaken. So I do not want to go into detail, but then I think you are able to get to learn a little bit about our actions, and then highlight a little bit about the, let's see, okay. So this picture, I'm just highlighting you indicating our vulnerability, and also indicating about the adaptation work that we are talking about here. We are talking about very tiny islands, This is one of the tourist resort islands in Dalo Atoll. And I'm just trying to show to you that these private sector, developments and investments are and need to be protected by undertaking the necessary adaptation measures. As such, we have here the coastal protection via hard engineered solutions as well as soft engineered solutions, which are very essential for the tourism product that we have, because sometimes the hard structures are not visibly or aesthetically very pleasing. So we have to undertake measures which are more soft engineered as well. So, and also because of the pristine environment and the vulnerability of the natural setting that we are developing these properties and investments, we need to undertake those carefully. So these kind of properties are developed with measures such as the environmental impact assessments and necessary precautions and mitigation measures. So here you can also see that how we have undertaken the design and layout of properties. This requires a lot of planning also, not only in tourist facilities but also in the local islands as well. Where do we put our infrastructure? For these purposes, you can see this, the tourist villas, the rooms are around the peripheral of the island, which is also at risk. But this is also something that keeps us at the very edge of marketing and promotion of the product that we have. So for that purposes, this kind of development has to be undertaken carefully and well planned. And in the center, you also see some of the energy and power and utilities that are generated in the island itself. So the layout and spatial arrangement is also taken into consideration. Some of the first special researchers who have undertaken work in the Maldives, like Professor Domros from the University of, I think he's from Germany. He has undertaken immense work and interest in the layout and spatial arrangements of these kind of properties and islands, how we manage in the Maldives. I'm showing another picture here of a local island. You can see that there's hardly any other options available for protecting the shoreline of these kind of islands. There's not much lagoon left. This is in the middle of the ocean. The island is in Nyamviani Atoll, Formula. And this island has to be protected with hard engineered solutions. And this is very critical and important for the people and the development of the island, that they have this kind of adaptation and protection as well. So these are the kind of measures that have been undertaken over the years. And a lot of that, investments is a huge burden on the government budget as well. And these kind of protection measures are undertaken with also, again, studies and coastal research as well. Some of the local researchers like Dr. Shaikh Aslam and also coastal engineers like Amjad have immensely researched on the kind of adaptation work that we have undertaken, and proposed that that we don't have much left apart from hard engineered solutions in these kind of situations. So we have to do that. And another work is also on reclaiming land, because we have run out of, we have very little land that is available for any development and work as well. I have discussed a little bit about the challenges that we learned from the information that we gathered for the BTR study as well. But again, financial constraints are one of the biggest challenges that we have, and that is a huge barrier as well for the implementation of this kind of adaptation work, which is very costly. And of course, we are a small island which is developing as well. And then we have the technical limits and capacity gaps as well. And of course, even for the monitoring of the climate and weather and long-term research, we need technical gaps, technical capacity building. And we have a lack of infrastructure as well, which we are seeking to, implement in the long term for the protection of the infrastructure, as well as the increasing our resilience for emergency responses and capabilities required. So furthermore, again, I would say that we also learned that we have definitely awareness and coordination gaps which we need to furthermore work on. So our priorities and opportunities, if I say to sum up, is that we have definitely undertaken a lot of work in terms of adaptation so far, but then due to limited financial, technical, and all the difficulties that we face, we still need a lot of support for further, predicted climate change impacts. And also Maldives needs enhanced international support, definitely. And we have to have not just the government, but also public, private, these kind of partnerships to effectively implement the programs and actions. Furthermore, we need to also develop additional indicators and to facilitate systematic adaptation work in the long term, and also to report for the BTR in the next, works that we need to, for the future forward work that we need to undertake. So I would like to thank everyone for listening in, and if you have questions, maybe we can take in later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Musa. And today's final presentation will be given by Mr. Tibian Ibrahim, Assistant Director. This presentation will be on finance in landscape, opportunities and challenges. Mr. Tibian Ibrahim.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending our side event. The BTR process was one of, I think, the biggest outputs of work we've done this year. It was a lot of hard labor from the Climate Change Department and several experts and consultants that worked with us on this. This chapter of the BTR report on the finance, technology, and capacity building is slightly different because I think this was mostly done, almost entirely done through the department itself. So we didn't really hire consultants to do this. And we worked in a very short time, as Ralpha indicated in the beginning. So just to first touch on the approach and methodology that we used when we approached this chapter of the BTR report, we looked at the BUR report, the Biennial Update Report of Maldives to the UNFCCC, and this is an extension of that report. So we used the same methodology and approach consistent with the BUR for this BTR. When we look at the data collection, we used a variety of sources. So this stems from international climate funds like the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, the Global Environment Facility, the SCCF, to name a few. But we also looked into other UN sources. So we do receive support through the United Nations Environment Programme, United Nations Development Programme, and other UN agencies. Lots of work, as Musa mentioned, on early warning system. So we have worked with WMO and UNDRR. So we captured these sources, and in addition to that, there's the MDBs, so Asian Development Bank, World Bank also undertake several projects in the Maldives, and we also received bilateral assistance directly from various partner countries. In addition to this, a lot of our climate finance in this period came from our own domestic sources of finance. So this includes from the domestic budget through the public sector investment program, or the PSIP, which is a program that we undertake in the Maldives. For data verification, some of the steps we did, and this highlights with the boxes you can see at the bottom of the slide, we mainly utilize the Ministry of Finance, since all donor projects go through the Ministry of Finance, as well as the budget is done through the Ministry of Finance. So they house a lot of the data that we used for this chapter. With this data, we did have to then consult line ministries. Many ministries undertake climate projects. There is a tagging system in place with the budget, both for sustainable development goals, but also for green tagging. And we did have to verify whether these projects are being undertaken and to what extent they are relevant to climate change and relevant to the methodology that we utilized. Also, we utilized published data. The ministry itself, the Ministry of Climate Change, Environment and Energy, undertakes the vast majority of the sort of climate projects that we undertake in the Maldives. So we utilized sort of these kind of resources, and then that was used for our analysis. So just looking into this slide here, this shows you how the climate finance we received was split between adaptation, mitigation, and cross-cutting. This is consistent with the BUR as well, where we saw mitigation as the leading thematic area of the climate finance we received, adaptation second, and cross-cutting third, but the differences in between are also relatively consistent. I think just to mention, for mitigation finance, we did see an increase compared to the BUR, a slight increase, whereas for adaptation finance, there was a slight decrease in the amount of finance that we did receive in this period. When we look at specifically these areas, and also going back to the previous slide on what kind of data we found, so we would look at the different projects that we received, what kind of scope these projects cover, what were the start or end dates of these projects, whether we utilized a donor fund, whether it was an MDB, what source of funding was received, the implementing entities, as well as looking into specifically whether it was what type of instrument of finance, or whether it was a grant, a loan, guarantee, or whether there was a co-financing component as well. In this slide, I do want to just mention that while you have the three areas, when you look at it overall, a lot of and a large majority of the climate finance that we received in this period was through domestic funding. So most of the finance, not most, but the largest percentage of the finance was through domestic funds, followed by grants and then concessional loans. So this table is in the Biennial Transparency Report, so you don't have to rush through it right now. You can take a look once you go through the report. But this shows you a very comprehensive overview of the climate finance that we've received in this period. It shows you to what areas, so whether it was finance, whether it was dedicated towards capacity building, whether it was dedicated towards technology transfer and support. And it shows you which the source was, whether we had any in-kind contributions, or whether, and to what amounts of co-financing were involved as well. So as you can see, like the overall total is around 439 million. And again, please just go through the report and you can see this in a lot more detail. Just wanted to touch also on the barriers. I'm sure you'll be aware that this is not a straightforward or easy process. It was quite challenging for us as well. There were some things that we had to, assumptions that had to be made as well in order to narrow things down. So one thing is that climate finance still is hard to define on an international level, and as well on a national level. Oh, sorry. So the barriers and challenges. So it is not a straightforward process. It is hard to define, mainly because there still is no international agreement on what constitutes climate finance. So for this reason, we utilized the BUR methodology that we used to identify what we would consider as climate finance and what thresholds would have to be met. And there also are situations where investments are made for multiple purposes. You can maybe those who are involved in climate finance would know that sometimes ODA is also counted as climate finance. So there sometimes are dual purposes where there is potential areas for double counting. So these were some of the challenges faced. Also, when it comes to tracking, it's a bit difficult for us in the Maldives right now to track finance completely. While as mentioned before, we do some form of budget tagging that is only limited to the domestic funds and to the public sector. We don't have any sort of information source to know what comes in from the private sector, as well as what comes in from NGOs. For councils, we do know that sometimes there are assistance that's provided directly to the council. It doesn't come through the sort of federal government. So for these sources of finance as well, we don't necessarily have a system where it is tracked in the current regime. And also there are capacity constraints. As I highlighted, this was done completely in-house. We did struggle to submit it on time. We weren't able to hire a consultant to do, I think, a more in-depth assessment. So this was labor of love of the climate change department. So yeah, that was definitely a constraint as well. So in improvement activities, we definitely think that there is scope to improve the current government tagging system, and there are some areas of work already in place to see that this can be moved to the next level. So there is capacity building that's being undertaken, and as mentioned, we do have a green tagging system in place for PSIP projects. So for this, there has to be guidance so that you can ensure that line ministries and agencies are aware of what constitutes green or climate finance. Usually, there are some interpretation differences, and it is subjective to who is filling forms. We also need to do some more work in capturing climate finance in the private sector. As Musa also highlighted in his presentation, many resorts undertake different sustainability initiatives, both for mitigation actions and for adaptation actions, which aren't captured in our climate finance regime. So this is an area we are trying to do some work with our CBIT project on NGOs, so to try and see how we can capture this. So there is some work in place. Hopefully that can be reflected in the next BTR cycle. So that is it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Thibian. And next we'll move on to the moderated question and answer session, which will be led by Mr. Ahmad Wahid. And may I invite Mr. Ahmad Wahid and the speakers to the front of the room so we can begin the next segment of the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. May I ask the speakers to come to the podium, to the front? 1, 2, 3. You can move there. Thank you, everyone. And I think it's a very important day for us, for the team, because today we were able to submit the BTR. It's available on the UNFCCC portal now. If anyone wants to see it, it's available on public domain. To begin with the first question, I would like to start with Ms. Raufa. She was the project, the manager. And I want to ask you, Raufa, we know that, as Thibian also highlighted, the whole exercise went to, you are working against the time. So why don't you brief us about the challenges that you face while preparing the BTR and submitting it on time, even before the deadline?
Thank you for the question. Well, it was a challenge. would say, let's start from the beginning. Firstly, mobilizing the support to develop the BTR to the Maldives. From there, by the time we got things started, we had the inception report, inception workshop with all of our stakeholders in February of this year. And since then, we did hiring of experts, and in parallel, we started data collection. So the main challenge was, I would say, the time, because even though the BTR development process wholly is 2 years, we do not get the full 2 years to work on it. Initially, the mobilizing funds take time, to set up the PMU takes time, to get the experts in place takes time, and it is only after that that the technical works can actually begin. So from there, it really helped that we had good institutional arrangements in place. Yeah, I would say that that would be the main challenge.
Yeah. Now, thank you, Rafa. Now, I have a question for Tibian. You mentioned about the tagging system, that there is a tagging system in place, which is perhaps not the perfect one, but what are the plans for the department? What plans do you have to improve this tagging system based on this BTR and the exercise that the finance colleagues have conducted while preparing the BTR?
Thanks for the question. I think, like I said, there's a lot of work that's being undertaken at the ministry, but also in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance as well. So right now, Maldives is doing quite a bit of work at national budget tagging led by the Ministry of Finance in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals and trying to incorporate climate budget tagging into that process. What we're trying to do from the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment and Energy side is provide that technical support as well. So we are identifying these challenges and barriers. We are trying to provide the technical expertise to the Ministry of Finance so that they are able to know how to do this process. There are gaps in terms of once a system is formulated, it does end up going to line ministries and agencies. And even with turnover in these agencies, we need to be able to ensure that they have the resources so that even someone new who comes, who has to then formulate a budget, formulate an activity on climate finance, related to climate finance or climate project, that they have the a guide or some sort of handbook in place to assist them to know what the sort of thresholds are. Within the ministry, as mentioned, the CBIT project is a big area where we are trying to build this capacity. This is mostly related to the NGO side, because that is an area where we are not able to capture it at all. Within the government, I think we are generally able to capture all of the donor funds, because that very sort of seamlessly goes through the Ministry of Finance. But when it comes to the private sector, I think that is also an area where we are seeking, I think, ideas as well on how to better capture that. But through the NGOs, that's something that we are aiming to shortly do, starting very soon with the CBIT project. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, the next question goes to Zamir. I think thanks, Zamir, for the very illustrative and very nice presentation, especially promoting the Maldives brand here. And you mentioned about the coordination and the awareness. I think this is quite important, especially when we work and when we engage with the private sector. So based on your assessment, what needs to be done and what can be done in the future to increase the awareness and also to improve the coordination? We know there is lots of work also from the private sector to increase the resilience and so also build the adaptation and the adaptive capacity of the island. So what are your thoughts on this area?
Yeah, I'm not definitely, there are a lot of things that yeah, there are a lot of things that can be actually done, but not as mentioned by Rafa. Within this very short time, we couldn't probably achieve what we have achieved, without a very good team backing you. So I think these kind of teams are important. They are very professional, and then for the adaptation and also on the let's say, awareness that you mentioned, I think the communities need to be more engaged, not just for these kind of exercises, for one-off kind of exercises, but rather on a long-term, systematic way of communicating and getting their feedback on the kind of activities and also on the adaptation work that we are undertaking. Same goes with the sectoral agencies. They are currently undertaking work for their planning and also their performance work, routine work. But I think we need to ensure that we have climate integrated in their routines as well. So I think this is very important. Right now we have a few important sectors that have climate adaptation work integrated into their sectoral plans, but we do not have for each sector. So again, the government agency and the lead agencies, the climate ministry, could support those sectoral agencies in developing climate mitigation and adaptation, strategies in their national plans. So I think that kind of isolation that we see at the moment, for example, in terms of, I could recall, is the transport sector, which is a bit weak, but also contributes to the mitigation and national NDC work as well. So they could be also supported. So same way, we have very new, very young local councils. They are not familiar with the adaptation and mitigation work. So I think it is important that we build capacity within the local councils to be able to provide the kind of information and data that is required to, allow us to prepare this kind of continuous reporting work. That's short, in short, what I could say on that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Now, I would like to know whether there are any questions from the audience. If there are any burning questions, clarifications.
Hi, Guli Sabahi. I'm a senior advisor on climate finance at NDC Partnership. Thank you very much for your presentation and for all the great work. I engage a lot with the private sector, and the private sector companies, as you have mentioned, they're undertaking a number of adaptation and resilient activities as part of their normal course of business, ordinary course of business. They are not even reporting or may not even fully realize how much of that is happening. So wanted to just note that. I think it's very important to understand what they're doing and how that could be further leveraged. But also learning from the experiences of other similar nations, if they were able to engage with the private sector more effectively, not just to protect the existing assets and developments, but also to attract private sector investments into other kind of sectors and priorities. We could also do some of that work, I think, but I wanted to get a sense from you all, like in engaging with the private sector with respect to the new investments, where do you think the interest is coming, and how do you think stakeholders could support?
Thanks so much for the question. I think when we look into the private sector that's invested in the Maldives so far on climate change, it's mainly been in the mitigation area. I think what we've seen is when it's their private assets, so as Musa showed in his presentation, there was the resort, and that's fully managed and owned by a private company. So they protect that resort, but then there's no sort of benefit to the local community from that because there's no local community living on that island. And that doesn't get translated to any of the records that we maintain. So when you look into local communities and local islands, and again in the presentation, he showed Formula, and it's an inhabited island in the south of the Maldives. That is the seawalls that were constructed in that island were done through the domestic budget. So what we've seen is for many adaptation actions, it's almost entirely dependent on the domestic budget. We don't see the private sector come in. And I did have a conversation when we were writing the BTR with the Ministry of Planning and Infrastructure on the historical support that's been received to islands in terms of adaptation and coastal protection. And we have roughly 200 inhabited islands. And from those inhabited islands, only 2 have ever benefited from bilateral assistance. The rest of these islands are all supported through the domestic budget. So we've seen in mitigation, when it comes to our renewable energy pipeline and our plans, private sector is coming in. There is quite a lot of interest, even though it is still small-scale projects with a small island developing state. But for adaptation, I have yet to see that kind of interest from the private sector.
Thank you. Musa, do you want to say anything, elaborate?
Yeah, on the private sector, I could talk on a little bit from my experience from the tourism sector. Tibian was right to say that, well, it has to make economic sense for the private sector. But the issue is not that they are not undertaking, but about reporting and getting. So I think for that, we need to have legal frameworks to support, data and information provision to those who are collecting this kind of information. So I think that is something that is required from the Maldives experience. What we see is the tourism sector, they are undertaking a lot of adaptation mitigation work, but they are not reporting directly to the relevant departments to be able to gather systematic information. And because of our dispersed geography, it's a very tedious work to gather this information. So we need to, when we want to do an assessment, that's just what I wanted.
Thank you. I think we can take 1 or 2 questions if there is any.
Thank you, and congratulations, Raufat, Thibian, Zamir, and team for putting this up in such a short amount of time. There are some wonderful findings as well as gaps highlighted in this report. I would like to ask that, from the ministry's end, in terms of policy intervention, like what do we feel would be the right policy intervention, and if there are any initiatives that we are currently taking to address these findings and gaps. Thank you.
So let me highlight some of the ongoing work, and then maybe Tibian can highlight the maybe future plans. So we do have an ongoing CBIT project through which some of the gaps, like Tibian highlighted, trying to track finance received into the private sector. There is some work ongoing to to capture information that comes in through NGOs and to the private sector. So we're developing some guidelines and some reporting mechanisms in there. So hopefully that will help improve our reporting in that area. And then there's also in the GHG and NDC tracking area, we have developed some guidelines already. And the next steps would be to sit down with our data providers and more align and streamline our data provision and the formats which we receive the data in, so that it makes analysis easier and help to reduce the gap that is seen right now. If we look at the report, if we take the reference approach and the sectoral approach, you can see a little bit of gap there. So this would hopefully help to bridge that gap to meet, to show the better reporting. I think that this ongoing work, and especially since we have made it in time, this report, we can hopefully continue the momentum to keep preparing for the next one. And in that way, if we continue the work, it would help to build. Tibian, if you would like to highlight.
Thanks, Rafa. I think also just to highlight so I have mentioned the financial information challenges that we face, and Rafa rightfully highlighted that the CBIT project will help to address some of them. With policy interventions, obviously, I think the findings and this BTR process will help inform our NDC, which we are compiling as well. There's a lot of information that we've received, a lot of consultations that we've had, and I think this process is definitely going to be streamlined to that process. Also to mention, I think, is that we very recently did publish reports on our technology needs assessment as well, and that those are also gaps that we've highlighted in the report in the same financial technology and capacity building chapter. So hopefully with the TNA being published, we'll be able to utilize that to also leverage further support moving on to address these technology gaps. I think capacity building is always going to be a running thing. Right now we do have a very young department. There's many new people on our team, so these are elements that we have to find a way to ensure that this training goes on, not only within the climate change department, but to the relevant line ministries as well. But in terms of the policy interventions, yeah, that I think is the insight.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have to take this as a holistic approach, where I think the whole reporting will continue, so building capacity and unlocking some of the policy interventions are quite important. That is something I believe the ministry will continue. There could be some legal strengthening the legal frameworks, as well as the continuous building of the capacity, not only in the ministry but also in other relevant departments as well as the private sector. So I think this is the important thing, and this is also the challenging thing, that integrating these policies and the practices into other sectors. So it takes time, I believe, especially with the very limited resources we have in terms of a SIDS country. So I think we are almost done. So if there are no questions, if there is I would like to end this conversation and thanking everyone. But before I end this, I would like to ask whether the speakers have any last comment. I will give you 30 seconds for everyone, each of you.
Thank you. Wrapping up, I would say that it's really important to find a way to regularly receive support. Like, for example, in the support we're receiving to develop PTRs, we are right now in the process of applying and mobilizing the support to receive support for the next PTR. So this is estimated to take another 6 months, maybe 7 months. So since this is coming into a regular reporting process, it would be really important that this mechanism can also be timely. I think that is very important.
I think just the one thing that I'd highlight is, if my understanding is correct, Maldives is the third small island developing state to submit a BTR, and that shows, I think, how difficult of a process it is to be third out of 39 member states. So I think a lot of commendation needs to go to Raufa and her team for being able to push us to submit by the deadline.
Yeah, thank you. I think I would just like to say that adaptation work is very essential, equally essential as well. We might be able to submit the next report, but then I would, as personally, local, I would like to see that we have implementation programs, actions that are supported and are able to be implemented in the country, because this is our future, and the adaptation work has to undertake, it's a kind of, work that we cannot avoid. We have to undertake, whether through the local government budget or with support from elsewhere. So it is an essential, for our livelihood, for our continuity for the future. So that is an important work that we need to undertake.
Thank you, everyone. With that, I would like to conclude this event by thanking everyone, and very thankful for the panel and also the guests who came to visit us, and also to give your contributions and for your questions. And thank you, everyone. Have a nice day. The meeting is closed. Thank you.